the most senior leaders I work with, the best senior leaders that I've worked with, have that vulnerability. I don't know everything. I have made mistakes, and they're genuine mistakes. It's not that kind of performative, like, oh, let me tell you about this terrible mistake, and it actually turned out that it was this amazing success. I think when you know your strengths, you know your areas of opportunity, you know the places where you're good and the places where you're not. And I think being comfortable with all of that lot just helps you to really kind of engage with the people around you, and it builds so much trust with everybody that you're working with. And I think as a first-time manager or first-time leader, you're so desperate to prove yourself that you feel less comfortable with saying like, hey, I don't know how to do that. Like, you're better than me at that. Don't come to me for this. Here's the bit where I add value. This is the stuff that I can help and support.
Adam, welcome to the show. How are you, my friend?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. Last time I saw you, not so good.
Migraine. Yeah, you weren't in the best shape, but I'm glad things have picked up for you. It must be the weather.
Yeah, what just made it better? I mean, this is the annoying part. The days in the UK that it's been really hot are the days that my PA's booked all back-to-back podcasts inside a warehouse with no sunlight. So it's like, oh man, I want to get outside, and it's interesting because it's nice and cool in here because it's like a contained warehouse. I go outside and I just kind of get hit with a heat wave.
That's good to know, though. I'll know in future when you're really busy with podcasts. Is when I should get the shorts out, because that's when the weather's going to be good.
Have you enjoyed it at all, or not really? Have you had a chance?
The weather?
Yeah,
it's great. It's been really nice. It's it doesn't really make you want to do any work, though, does it?
I know.
It's definitely more of a kind of hanging out in a beer garden kind of.
I came home the other day in the afternoon early, and my wife was in the garden with my daughter, just like sun lounger out, jacuzzi. And I was like, "What's going on here?" I'm like, "I'm working like," and like, you lot are on like holiday right now, living the dream. I'm missing out. My daughter's like, yeah, I've been in here for 3 hours. I'm like, oh yeah, great, fantastic. I'm going back to the studio to do a show as well. Well, it won't last long, right? Typical UK weather. Give it a couple of days, we're back to rain.
I think it is going to get cooler over the next couple of days, but it gives us something to talk about, right?
Yeah, we can't win though, because now I'm hearing everyone complain it's too hot. It's like typical English. It's too hot, it's too cold. You can't win. We'll always we'll find a way. Before we jump in, Adam, tell everyone a bit more about your background, because you have a super interesting journey to where we are now, and then obviously what you're currently up to.
Yeah, absolutely. So original background, not massively dissimilar to yourself. So I grew up on a council estate in East Lancashire rather than East London. So I grew up there, first generation to go to university, decided that I wanted to go to uni and get something that would be practical and helpful and would, give me a job and a career. So I picked print journalism, which in the mid-90s sounded like a good idea. And then, 2025 is a bit less of a good idea. And I ended up in various reasons, but I ended up in Southern California and worked as a kind of freelance writer there for a little bit. Decided that I was never going to win any Pulitzers. Maybe it wasn't quite for me. I don't know if you necessarily pick the best career when you're like 16, right?
No, I know what to do.
And then I went back to university to study history and got a part-time job working in a smoothie shop. So it's about as Southern California as you can get.
Yeah, have it out or coffee. Have it out or a coffee shop, basically.
Yeah, I went to uni in Malibu and I made smoothies as a part-time job. And basically kind of like lived in sandals and shorts and stuff. And that's how I got into learning and development. So I worked there, and then I became an assistant manager and a store manager, and the person who trained the store managers and the person who trained the people who trained the store managers. So that was my kind of segue into L&D. So I've always had that operator background. I've always brought that sense into it rather than, the academic, like I did occupational psychology or any of that kind of stuff. So it's been that operator piece. And so, yeah, that was my kind of journey into L&D. Came back to the UK, worked for a similar business, and then moved more into the office-based corporate kind of world. And I've been in market research, TV, mobile phones, print. Finally got back into print journalism, worked for the Financial Times for a little while. I did not tell the journalist there that I had also trained as a journalist. I felt definite imposter syndrome around, kind of actual writers. Spent some time at Facebook doing leadership development there. And I've just come back from a couple of years in South Korea working for a company called Coupang, who were the kind of Amazon of South Korea. And now, back in the UK, doing some freelancing stuff and some consultancy for sort of startups and smaller organizations who are looking to, I think, invest a little bit more in their learning strategy and their leadership, get a bit more kind of support and development there. So it's really nice to be able to move from a big organizations where you got a ton of resource, but it moves really slowly. Yeah. Into smaller, scrappier organizations where maybe they don't have some of that stuff, but the speed of implementation and the ability to go from an idea to a decision is so different. So really enjoying that.
Super happy for you. I mean, there's pros and cons to both, obviously, right? Mm-hmm. But I would always, choose the scrappy approach. Like one of the things I love about obviously running this business is exactly what you just said. Is like Shane and I could have an idea today and execute mm-hmm. tomorrow. Execute the same day. We've we've gone away, like had an idea, gone home, built the website, built the product. Next day, launched it, and 2 days later, there's money hitting the bank account, right? And that is like a drug. Like it's so high for people that haven't experienced that. Like coming from a very large business where you've got like you said, so much red tape and it's moving so slowly, to then just being unleashed. Don't get me wrong. There's also the risk because you now own it. The cost mm-hmm. is on you, right? So it's people like the idea of it sometimes, and then like, oh, this land, if it goes wrong, it's on me, and also I'm funding it. So there's that part of it, but that's what comes, it comes with the territory. If you really want to do that as well. What was the thing that made you? What was the catalyst that made? What was the why behind you making that change from working in large scale to now going on this new journey?
I think you always want to walk the walk when you're in learning and development about constantly developing and pushing yourself and really understanding what the people you work with are kind of going through. And I'd been in a number of different organizations, a lot of bigger companies. And I felt that this was a space that I kind of wanted to get back into a little bit. It was an area that I didn't know a ton about. When you work with tech organizations, you're dealing with a lot of people who have worked in startups before or been part of that ecosystem. And so you hear a little bit from them about it and wanting to get in there and do that myself. Setting up your own businesses, you'll know you learn so much that you had absolutely no idea about, right? And some of it you really wish you didn't have to learn about. I didn't think I was going to be sitting here trying to work out what pension provider I was going to have, but these are all things that you kind of have to pick up and sort of go through. And I think the more you, as I said, I come from an operator background, and I've always felt that learning and development is at its best when it really understands the business. And I've always been hyper interested in the businesses that I've worked in, how they operate, what their challenges are, what their strategy is, how they would approach that. I've always felt more of a business leader first rather than an L&D person. And so I think this is just another opportunity to kind of explore in that space and do it in a different environment.
Yeah. And that's the same conversation I'm having with CHROs every day, right? Exactly mm-hmm. through the same lens. Like we literally had a session on Wednesday with Dave Auric and around 50 CHROs. And we're still having this conversation around HR is not HR, HR is the business, right? And working back from the business and the customer. And how do we actually make money, and then working back towards learning in HR, and then how do we help support that, right? As well, it's crazy that we're still having that conversation 20 years later from when I started. It's still not evident in most companies. HR and L&D and most businesses I'm speaking to are still order takers, to say it nicely.
I think you get in your comfort zone. You get in the space that you like doing. I think there's a lot of learning and development, there's a lot of HR that is done for other HR people or other L&D people, the way that we design stuff, the way that we build things, the way that we talk about it, the language that we use. I don't think we're as business focused and business understanding as maybe we should be. When I was leading my teams, I would always say to them, have business conversations first. Don't go in with, here's a learning and development solution. Don't go in with, here's the latest thing that we've got. Don't go in with, here's the program that we have. Like, go in, be curious about what your stakeholders are experiencing, what's happening with their world. Yeah. Whenever we had one-on-ones or team meetings or discussions, we would always start off with, what are we hearing in the organization? What's happening there? And that would always ground us in whatever else it is that we were doing. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that, we should be part of that ecosystem and supporting it rather than kind of off doing our own thing, which makes us feel good about what we're creating, what we're building. Yeah. It's our nice, happy space, but I don't think that's, I don't think that challenges enough, and I don't think that's really what our organizations are after.
No. A big part of every conversation I'm having right now, as you can imagine, with HR executives is upskilling and reskilling their leadership, and a big focus on frontline managers. What are some of the lessons from your time at Facebook and Coupang on supporting leaders, especially in high growth, high change settings, that you could share with our audience?
Yep. So I think that the first thing that you need to get, especially leaders, to think about is really focusing on impact. There's a lot of, Facebook's full of buzzwords and you take them away with you. And I think focus on impact is really one of those that's kind of lived with me. It's, what is my role here? How do I add value? What is it that I'm here to do? What is it that I'm here to kind of achieve? And that should be the stuff that guides you, whatever your role is. If you're a first line manager, okay, how do I add value to my team? How do I support the people around me? What is it that they need from me? And what does my business need from me? If you're an organizational leader with, 1,000 people underneath you, again, what's my role? How do I add value? What does that kind of look like for me? So I think that's the piece that people need to get super clear on. And when you work with leaders or you work with managers and they're struggling, it's usually because they're not clear on what they're doing. Like, how am I adding value? What's the impact I'm having in the business? I think that's the first thing that people need to get clear on. The next one is around tensions. I talk to leaders a lot about how you manage tensions. That's kind of the heart of leadership, is making those decisions between, well, we could do this or we could do this, and I have to pick a thing. Which one do we go with? So usually it's related to, speed versus quality, or speed versus inclusivity, or kind of knowing and getting into the detail versus delegating and trusting my team. Like, where am I on that kind of spectrum, and how am I managing all of that? And again, I think whether you're a manager for the first time or you're a leader, where are you on those, and are you picking the right place for you to be at that moment in time? Like, what is it that you need to be doing? What are the people around you need to be doing? How do you do that? And then I think the third thing is around just being intentional. Why am I doing the things that I'm doing? Why am I saying the things that I'm saying? Why am I acting in the way that I'm acting? Is it what I need to be doing right now? Or is it because this is my comfort zone? Is it because this is better for me? Is it because, this is what I've seen my previous managers and bosses do, or the people around me doing? And I think you need to sort of sit down and reflect on what that is. So, a lot of this is it's usually not a knowledge piece.
No.
It's usually more around where and how are you spending your time, and is that really the right place and space for you to be? And I think just getting managers and leaders to reflect on a regular basis helps them to check in with themselves about where they're spending their time and where they're spending their energy.
Practically, in your previous organizations, how did you execute on that and bring that to life?
Yeah. Facebook, we had this idea around.
I love the way we still call it Facebook, by the way, because I also call it Facebook and not Meta. I just putting it out there. I also, my friends, I interviewed people recently from Meta, but I still say Facebook as well.
Yeah.
So go carry on.
I know I'm kind of old school. I guess it's because I started at Facebook. And there's a whole other conversation there around, Facebook as an organization was very different to Meta as an organization, and
the whole other podcast
made during the middle of all of that lot. But so Facebook/Meta. We talked about we had a kind of moments piece of it. So we talked about kind of micro moments, current moments, and then these kind of major moments in your career. I forget the actual phrase that we gave for the third one. And micro moments was building this practice into your day-to-day life. And we were talking about this a little bit before we came on air about integrations with things. I think the more you can bring in this idea of this self-reflective practice into the tools that you're using already, the easier it is for you to kind of go through that. If you joined as a leader at Meta, the first thing that you got was you joined this massive tech organization, right? Super, on the cutting edge of technology. And the first thing you got was you got a notebook and pen. And I was like, here you go. Congratulations, Chris. You're a senior VP of such and such. Here's a notebook and pen. And in the notebook was a series of these kind of self-reflective practices. It was an invitation every day for you to build that habit of checking in with, what am I doing today? Where am I spending my energy? Where does my team need me to be spending it? Where does the business need me to be spending it? How am I approaching that? And I think that habit of doing that, taking that time away to stop and pause and reflect and say, right, what do I need to do today? Or what do I need to do this week? And building that in as a habit. I think that is one of the best things that leaders can do or managers can do. I mean, I used to do that when I first became a manager 20 odd years ago. I would carve out a couple of hours every week where I would do that. I would reflect back on the previous week. What went well? What didn't go well? What do I need to do differently? What data do I have to back up some of those assumptions? And then what do I need to do for the week ahead? And then reflecting on that. And then again, going back and saying, okay, I made these tweaks and changes. What happened there? Did that work? Did it not work? So I think that habit is absolutely kind of critical for people. And that doesn't require lots and lots of infrastructure. It doesn't require lots and lots of time. It doesn't require lots and lots of investment from an individual or from a learning and development perspective. It just requires that kind of continual focus of the importance of delivering that and the importance of doing that. And then I think sharing the benefits and the stories that kind of come from that. So that was the kind of micro moments piece. Current moments was focusing on what was going on in the business, in the world, whatever that might be. I mean, a major kind of current moment was that change from Facebook to Meta. What that meant, how you bring people through that within the organization, this pivot towards the metaverse. Obviously, when you're in a company like Meta, there's a lot of external noise that you have to deal with and you have to talk about. But then there are also internal challenges and opportunities that you can discuss as well. So I think also looking for how you bring that to life for people and what that looks like. And then the major moments are, probably more programmatic, getting hired, getting promoted, leading a new project. There's probably more of an investment of time. But I think if you're a new manager or a leader, you don't need to spend lots and lots of time. You just need to be thoughtful about how you're checking in with yourself, about how you're spending your energy, and that will give you the biggest uplift.
Yeah. Well, that was going to be my next question. It was like when most managers, including myself, were just thrown into the deep end. Oh, Chris, you're a great, individual sales contributor. Surely you're going to be a great manager. And all of a sudden, I found myself out of nowhere a manager of a team of 30 people with zero experience. What advice do you give for both like HR leaders in terms of how they can help support first-time managers and really help set them up for success?
I think the biggest struggle for first-time managers is that move from me to we.
Yeah.
It's my successes because of the things that I've done. And now my success comes from how I support other people. And the tendency to lean in too much. You're a parent, so you'll know this better than I will, but that sense that you can't be overly protective because people have to learn themselves. They have to fail to a certain extent in order to kind of understand things. Do I know when it's enough failure for them to learn versus, catastrophic failure for them and for the business? Like, where's that kind of balance and where's that line? But I think a lot of it is letting go and trusting the team and checking in with them. And again, I think this is one of those where you have to say to yourself, that is my role now. My role is not to be a super individual contributor. My role is to lift up others around me and help them to shine. So what is it that they need from me how do I support them? How do I work with them? What does that look like? One of my favorite, I'm not a huge model guy, but one of my favorite is this action-centered leadership piece, certainly for new managers, where you have this idea around, balance. You're like spinning plates. You got individual. So how do I support each individual within my team? Because they're all different people and they all need slightly different things. But I also have to think about us as a collective and as a team. How do we have one goal? How do we have one vision? How do we all stay kind of connected and supportive of one another? But then we also need to get stuff done. As a manager, I'm given tasks. I'm given, KPIs that I need to hit, OKRs, all of these kinds of things. How do I keep my team engaged and my individuals engaged so that we're hitting all the stuff that we need to? And you're constantly spinning these plates and thinking about, where am I doing this well? Where am I not doing it well? And I think just visualizing that and knowing that you're jumping from place to place to place, I think the final thing you can do is just give yourself some grace. Like, you're going to mess it up, right? You're going to make mistakes because you're a human being. And I don't think that the people that you support as a manager, they don't expect you to be perfect. They will tell you what it is that they expect from you, but they don't expect you to be perfect. They don't expect you to get every answer right. They don't expect you to know everything. And I think being comfortable with that and being okay with making some mistakes, I think that just takes a lot of pressure off your shoulders. I think when you try to be perfect is when you kind of mess it up a little bit.
Yeah.
So I think for you as managers, that's probably the main thing to kind of think about.
Yeah, that last part was a real game changer for me, and it comes up all the time. Came up yesterday in a podcast with a CHRO that I was speaking to, and I said, "What was one of the main things lessons you've learned over your career?" And the first thing he said was, "When I go into a new role, is being vulnerable in the way that you just and understanding that I'm going to make mistakes and I'm going to have to lean on my team, and sharing that hey, just because I'm the chief people officer doesn't mean I have all the answers."
Yeah, and it comes from experience, and it comes from confidence. The most senior leaders I work with, the best senior leaders that I've worked with, have that vulnerability. I don't know everything. I have made mistakes, and they're genuine mistakes. It's not that kind of performative, like, oh, let me tell you about this terrible mistake, and it actually turned out that it was this amazing success. It's not that kind of interview style, question. My biggest weakness is I just have too many strengths, that sort of stuff. It's I think when you know your strengths, your areas of opportunity, the places where you're good and the places where you're not. And I think being comfortable with all of that lot just helps you to really kind of engage with the people around you, and it builds so much trust with everybody that you're working with. And I think as a first-time manager or first-time leader, you're so desperate to prove yourself that you feel less comfortable with saying, like, hey, I don't know how to do that. Like, you're better than me at that. Don't come to me for this. Here's the bit where I add value. This is the stuff that I can help and support with.
Yeah. It's interesting because what the fear of that is obviously that you're going to be seen as less than, or, this sort of imposter. But what you find, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on what I found, is it creates incredible relationships and trust with those people. They're way more engaged. That creates a lot of psychological safety in the team because they feel like, oh wow, I can actually be a human being. And actually also you'll find that they're now more willing to share, right, when they're struggling, etc. So it just does the opposite. Of all of the fears that you have, it actually does the complete opposite, and vulnerability then becomes a superpower as opposed to a weakness.
Yeah. We would talk a lot about courage with leaders, and that is one of those areas where you need to be courageous about just being honest. The things that you don't know, the fallibilities that you have, the mistakes that you've made, sometimes even just the agony that you're going through making a decision, right? Like, I don't know if this is the right thing for us to do, but we're going to go do it, and I'm going to take the ownership of that. I think that I've always been a big believer that the more information you have, the better decisions that you make. And so I've always been big on sharing lots and lots of information with people in my team. And I think that if you can build an environment where people are comfortable with talking about what they're thinking, what they're feeling, what they're confident about, what they're not confident about, what they know, what they don't know, what their fears and concerns are. I think that just gives you more and more data to make better decisions.
Yeah.
I think when you're pretending or putting up a facade, I think that means that you're closing down a data set that you could be using to make a much better decision. So I would rather know people in my team or people that I work with, what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, what they really think about something. And I would want them to know the same about me. I want to role model that for them. I'm a big believer that leadership really sets the tone for what happens across an organization. And so I think you have to live that if you want to have that type of environment and to have that kind of information and data yourself.
Yeah. Hey, one of the things I used to do earlier in my career, and even here, to be honest, sometimes HR leaders, I used to try think that I was doing my employees a favor by sheltering them from some of the hard decisions that needed to be made, or some of the circumstances that we were, that we found ourselves in. That if I shelter them for that, I'm protecting them. But I feel like I realized I'm kind of robbing them of a moment to build resilience, to our point earlier, to bring their diversity of thought and perspective and insights to the conversation. And I've said this many times on the podcast, but like the pandemic for us was one of the big ones where I had to come to the team and say, we've lost 90% of our revenue because we did physical events and that's how we made money. And obviously the world shut down. I don't know what we're going to do, which is really hard to come back to the office and say that to the team, but we're going to figure it out today and make a decision together. That's probably one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, is because they're all looking to me like, hey, like, how am I going to pay my mortgage? I've got kids at home, and I'm like, what's the plan, Chris? And I was like, I don't know. This is like kind of what this is what I have in mind, but I don't know. And together we made that decision, and the level of commitment from everyone, that we were truly in it together, just was amazing. And the discretionary effort that was put in, and it was just a really refreshing moment and it empowered everyone in the business that we're pushing in the same direction together.
The greatest team that I ever worked with was back in my kind of smoothie shop days. And from very early on, we did the same sort of thing. We had a massive whiteboard in the back of the store, and we'd write all of the financials on there. And we're talking about, I was in my early 20s. The vast majority of the staff were 17, 18. You're on minimum wage. You're doing 8 hours a week, kind of part-time or something like that. This is not usually thought of as being an environment where people are kind of super engaged with what's going on. But we had all this information up there, and we just shared all of that really openly. And people would come up to you. They would say, hey, look, I'm looking at the numbers, and, sales are kind of slow this week. So, why don't I go home a couple of hours early? People are taking that on themselves and empowering themselves to do that kind of stuff because they feel an ownership for kind of what's happening and what's going on. And when there's success, then they share in that success. And when there's issues and challenges, then they share in that as well. And it becomes more kind of collaborative. Of course, you as the leader or as the manager, you take probably the majority of that kind of decision-making process. And ultimately it was, hey, this is my business and I need to work out what some of this stuff looks like. But you're inviting people into that conversation. You're inviting people into that discussion. And I think the more that you do that, whether it is situations like that or whether it's just, as organizations, we talk a lot about how you deal and handle with change, right? And I think when you feel like you understand the reasons and you're part of making those decisions, you're much more comfortable with what's happening and what's approaching. I think when it's done badly is when you try to, as you said, you shelter people from it. You try to hide them from what's going on and then make the perfect decision and then land that. And I think that's when it goes badly. To speak to the tensions, though, there are moments when, as a leader, you need to make a judgment call of course, where is this information useful?
Yeah, of course.
And then where is this information noise that gets in the way?
Yeah,
right? Like, I know these things, and then this is useful to help people to make decisions and to feel part of it. And then this is stuff they don't necessarily need to know. I'm not hiding it from them, but I don't think it's as useful as it could be to help them with what it is that they need to do right now. So I think you need to be checking in with yourself and saying, what do they need to help them? And then what would be a distraction or, would get in the way of them being able to execute right now. And I don't think you ever get that balance perfectly right, but it's definitely one of those things you need to think about.
It's a tough one. One of the things you said before, which I thought was interesting, is the focus should be on creating conversations, not programs. Mm-hmm. Could you share what you mean by that and why that's important?
Yeah. I think that programs are too slow for a start. If you're building learning and development programs, nobody needs to wait around for 9 months for you to kind of build and create it, or for them to get an invite to it or something like that. And I think certainly if you're dealing with junior ICs or you're dealing with junior managers, you probably need more programmatic support. I think if you're dealing with senior leaders, programs tend to focus on knowledge acquisition, and leaders don't tend to need that. What they tend to need is knowledge application. I already sort of know what it is that I should be doing, but how do I apply what I know to the situation that I find myself in right now? And they need to solve those problems now, especially if you're in a fast-paced, high change environment, or they need to solve them before they become a problem with a big P, right? You can kind of see it coming down the pipeline. And they also live in these really hyper-specific contexts where a program will give you generic scenarios, generic content that you'll kind of play around with, and instead they need hyper context. I also think that when you're with leaders, even if they go on a program, if you ask them what it is that they liked about it, it's the conversation they had with other leaders.
Yeah, during what
was the best thing about that 5-day residential program that you went on? And it's like, it was really great to connect with these people and talk about what challenges they face in their business and how they're approaching it. And then we did some kind of peer coaching and things like that. So I think it's more about how do you create those moments where people can have useful conversations. So it could be you as a L&D business partner or a leadership coach or whatever it might be, enabling that. I'm a big believer in upskilling and working with HR business partners to do that. I mean, that was one of the best things about working at Meta. They were an amazing team of HR business partners there, absolutely fantastic. And they were great at doing this sort of stuff. So again, they were a good sounding board for leaders around them to give them that support and to engage them in those kind of conversations. And I think this is, where AI starts to come into it a little bit more now, right? That ability to be able to have a conversation in the moment when you need it, but nobody's physically around for you to engage with, but you can engage with a virtual conversation. I mean, even if it's just you banging a few prompts into, ChatGPT, and I mean, it's always good for the ego, right? It always tells me everything I put in there is like the greatest idea ever, and this is going to be fantastic, right? So I always love that bit at the beginning, but I think you can train these models so that they're engaging and encouraging people about how they're thinking about doing it, how they're thinking about approaching it, what they're looking at doing. So I think most of what leaders need, in fact, even most of what managers need is, a conversation or a discussion. The stuff we were talking about there, just as a first line manager. Hey, this is the challenge that I face. What should I do? Okay, what are you thinking of doing? I'm thinking about doing this and this. Okay, what's the impact of doing that? You don't need to go to a course to learn these things. You just need to bounce some ideas off of somebody. And that's a 5-minute conversation that just gives you the insight or the confidence to go and make the decision that you need to go make.
Yeah. It's so interesting you say that, because when we first built Atlas Copilot, that was one of the challenges is you, like OpenAI, you just put, it wasn't conversational. So one of the first things we did was train the model to be bidirectional and conversational. So typically you ask ChatGPT something, it just spits out an answer, right? Whereas we now Atlas will follow up with questions like, but why? What are you trying to achieve? And it engages in a dialogue, and obviously over time it learns more about the user than probably they know about themselves. in terms of that. And next month we're actually launching the voice equivalent, so you just have a conversation, an actual conversation with Atlas, and it will challenge you, ask questions back, and it will also understand the context of your business. So any enterprise company we work with, we actually embed the HR strategy, the business strategy, the leadership competencies, the culture, basically as much as we can, so that when it's asking questions back, it's also through the lens of your organization. And that's super cool. To be able to have that. It knows your job title, right? It knows your function. Those are all really interesting things that you don't, having that power in your pocket to do that is pretty cool. So,
anything you can do to reduce the friction between what you're learning and your ability to apply it is always useful. So it knows, or eventually they will know, who you're talking about, what the issues are, what the challenges are, culturally, how you approach some of these conversations within your own organization, right? Because how you do it in one is not going to be the same as in another. You know, you can go watch a video somewhere about how to have a performance conversation, but it's like, well, we wouldn't actually do that in our company, or that's not how somebody would answer it or what they would do. So you're able to really kind of train it on these kinds of things. So I think having that kind of performance support is always going to be useful. I don't think it replaces conversations with others, but I think it does give you another support tool and another support mechanism that you can kind of work with. So yeah, I think having that coaching in your pocket, support there that you need for those moments, I think is just going to build so much kind of confidence for managers and leaders to go into those kinds of conversations.
Yeah. One of the biggest surprises we always get is when people go into the Atlas, they don't realize that they're like, oh, you have in person. And they're like, yeah, we have this, but once a month, you know, we have different events all over the world where these leaders will come together. They're like, why have you built that? Like, you got an AI. I'm like, because you can never replace that part. And we've had like other investors and people say, you should like get rid of that and just make this purely a tech play. And we're like, no. You know, we don't want to lose that element. So once a week we come together virtually and we do sort of like breakout rooms, and then quarterly we come together in person, and that's all part of the ecosystem. To your point, there's certain things like you are right. The main thing that people talk about, ask them about, you know, HR leaders of the last 10 years, they will mention a conversation or someone they met. And how that conversation led to X, you know, it is always that. Like, it always comes back to that. What we're trying to do with Atlas is just in the flow of work, how can we give you instant answers to your questions and just help you, as opposed to replace, to your point, all of the great things that we know that already works.
And it's the serendipity of those conversations, right? Exactly. It's meeting somebody and talking about something that you didn't go there to talk about, or you didn't even know that person was there. But yeah, these tools, they add value. I don't think they take away from things. They just give you another thing. Oh, I wish I had such and such. And now you have the ability to be able to do that you wish you had before. So I think they're additive to kind of what's out there and what you've got. And I think they're going to be so useful for people. Like, I wish I had those bits instead of having the ability to have snippets of conversations with somebody or just figure stuff out for yourself. To be able to have that reassurance and that guidance available to you kind of on demand, in addition to all the other stuff that you got, like, it's going to be super useful for people.
What do you, with the age of AI, what do you think the biggest challenge is going to be for L&D teams? Because this is like really one of the biggest disruptors we've ever seen. And, you know, you're seeing these AI tools pop up where, hey, we're going to create a learning pathway or a course that would take you normally a couple of months in seconds. You just upload your materials here. We're going to spit out a learning pathway. Like, there's just so much going on. Like, how do you think this is going to impact the role of someone in L&D now, or the team?
I think that it's always hard when you're in the middle of it to know. I agree with you. I think AI feels different to some of the previous ones. You know, I've been in it for kind of long enough to have been through all the other stuff. I mean, at least we've stopped talking about everything being the Netflix of learning. That was big for a few years. Then everything was going to be VR. Now AI is
that disappeared quickly, didn't it? The AI
that did
VR,
disappear. And I mean, I shouldn't say that being ex-Meta, but yeah, that did kind of
didn't catch on that well.
Disappear pretty quickly. But I think that I think it enables us to do so much more, to move so much quicker than we could have done before. You know, I think that when I was at Coupang, we restructured the team, we reorganized the learning and development function so that we could be much quicker, much more agile than we had been before. Before, it was very program and moment focused. It was, you know, we'd spend a couple of months building an event, and it would be a blended event. You know, there'd be some pre-work and there'd be some post-work and there'd be a workshop and all of these kinds of things. And then we switched to developing a lot more content much more quickly. We were putting something out into the business probably once a week. It wasn't perfect, but that was the point. It was building and gathering that data and then using it and iterating and learning for each time. and being able to test lots of different versions. How does this one land with this audience versus this audience? How does this messaging work? What about when we design it in this way? Like, what does that look like? And I think AI allows you to move much faster from idea to some sort of solution out there. And it enables you to gather that data and information. It allows you to analyze that data and information a lot quicker. So I think it becomes something that is a huge opportunity for L&D teams. I think it means that you can be out in the business talking to people, understanding what's going on, gathering their needs, realizing what their pain points are, really kind of embedding yourself there rather than doing an annual learning needs analysis, locking yourself away in, L&D or HR only rooms, building stuff and then releasing it, twice a year, and then sitting around and waiting for the happy sheets to roll in and to deliver some sort of ROI PowerPoint deck at the end of the year. I think it just allows you to spend so much more time actually with the business and less time probably building and creating things. You can speed that stuff up. With AI tools, it's always about being able to evaluate what comes out of it. It will create great stuff if you give it good prompts, and then you also have to know what comes out of it, whether it's really fit for purpose, and then kind of train it again, right? So you still need that lens, that knowledge, that understanding around, kind of what really works and what doesn't really work, but it speeds up everything else in between. I'm super excited about what it enables teams to be doing. I wish it had been around 10 years ago. I could have done so much more and had so much more impact.
Yeah. You mentioned the word like impact, like story as old as time has always been the challenge in L&D of like, how do we measure ROI of spend? How do you think AI is going to help with that, having the data that that would take months and years to gather that we now can do within minutes in some cases?
I think we can do it better. I think learning and development has often not wanted to talk about ROI because, as I said, I think for many years and still in some organizations, we build L&D stuff for L&D people, and we build programs that look good and look nice, and then we say, oh, it's really hard to evaluate it and the impact on it and that kind of thing. And I think when you start to think more of like, what's a business problem that we're going after, and then how do we support that, and what does that look like? So at Coupang, one of the challenges was around top talent retention, which isn't necessarily a kind of where you would start from an L&D program, but then you take that as a challenge and then you work back from that. So that gives you your data set, and that gives you your understanding. And I think it gives you better access to data across your business. I think where AI might struggle is most companies have pretty bad data about what goes on inside their own organization, particularly when it comes to people. And I think that needs to change. I know you've had a bunch of people analytics kind of experts on the show and have talked to them. And I know that there's improvement there, but I really do think that needs to be improved. There's definitely, you want to be data driven. You want to make great decisions based off of that. Often the data is not available to you, or it's very difficult for you to interpret. I think AI will help that. And I think it will also shine a spotlight on where that needs to be improved so you can make better decisions about what it is that you're going after. I mean, I say that as, Facebook, Meta, their entire business model is about understanding their users' data and then monetizing that, right? Internally, didn't always have the greatest data about what was going on. I've worked for market research firms where it's the same thing. So I think that we need better internal people data so that we can have a better understanding around the impact that we're having, but it has to drive from that. The value of AI, though, is it means that your ability to extract information from that data and tell stories from that data is sped up so much more. Yes. And it's given to complete data dunces like myself, right? Like my wife cringes every time I go near an Excel spreadsheet.
Same as me.
So yeah, right. Whereas this just allows you to do that so much quicker than you could have done before. So I think that's going to give you a ton of insights, and it's going to allow you to really focus in on like what are major business challenges that we should be solving. Like what are 2 or 3 things that have real business impact, and then go after that rather than let's create lots and lots of programs and lots of stuff.
I love I wish you was in my founders meeting a few months ago and said that. That was one of the biggest changes we made to our product, is that we had this amazing learning repository of all of the content, all of the learning pathways, but so what, right? Like, it's like, you start going into a supermarket and you have all the ingredients. You're like, but what meal are we making? And one of the things that we end up completely revamping Atlas is to start with the business. And so what we designed is an agent that when we onboard a client, it basically sends out some messages to the organization and kind of gathers information from, frontline managers, HR, etc., about what are the sort of core challenges, and it brings it back. So it gives you, so what will take you weeks and months, it can just send it out via Teams and Slack, ask questions, gather that information, bring it back. And on top of that, you then can upload different data points from the business, whether it's the HR strategy, the business strategy, your literally the financials. We've had companies upload that, and then you basically provide all of the context, and then based on that feedback, you can then create specific learning pathways directly linked to those business outcomes. And that completely changed the way we view and build our product, because when we talk about ROI, well, we know exactly what the one specific thing we're focusing on, and then building from there. So then we can actually measure the ROI of that as well. But that was a big shift for me and the team to be like, okay, we're not doing just learning here, or the Netflix, the AI powered of the Netflix learning model. We're actually creating real change, and starting at the top of the business and then coming back down. So that was a big pivot for us along the journey.
Organization that I'm supporting at the moment, the company that I'm working with right now, same thing, help us develop a learning strategy. And it's like, okay, what are the business challenges? What does that stuff look like for you? It's a SaaS product, it's a startup, it's a small organization, hyper growth. The traditional pattern would be, okay, let's build out your learning offering. Here's a bunch of stuff for your ICs. Here's a bunch of stuff for your managers. Here's a bunch of stuff for your leaders. Let's make sure that we got the full catalog of things available to you. And for this, it's not. There's basically 4 work streams that come out of it. And then one of them, from a management development perspective, is entirely focused just on performance conversations. And it's not, your managers have a lot of skill gap areas across a variety of different things. But the thing that is going to have the biggest uplift for your organization is performance conversations. It's not all of the other stuff. Would that benefit them? Sure, of course it would. But the focus area for you, the biggest uplift for you, is around helping them to make these conversations much more impactful, because the knock-on effect across the rest of your business is that. So we're not building a management development program. We're building support to enable managers to have these one specific types of conversations. And then that is the thing that will give you the kind of biggest uplift. So I think that's where, learning development strategies need to be. What's an actual business challenge? What's a people related challenge to that? And then where does learning help to support that? If we apply learning here, that's how it impacts your people. That's how it impacts your business. That's the thing that you need. You don't need, a bunch of just learning for you that's kind of out there. I love your piece around going to the supermarket. We used to get this a lot. People come to you in learning development, like, what's available for me for my development? What should I be working on? It's like, what do you want to do? Like, that's where you start with, right? When you go to what do you want to make?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, what do you want to have for dinner tonight, right? You don't just roam around the supermarket. It's overwhelming. There's too much stuff, right? I don't tell you everything that I've got. It's like, what do you want to make? Okay, then I can help you with like how you put all that lot together. What do you already have? Okay, you only need these 2 ingredients then to kind of do that. So I think that's where, learning strategies have got to go. It's not about content, because content's kind of out there now. It's about, helping deliver what it is that you actually need for whatever it is that your kind of business challenge is at that moment in time.
Yeah. And that goes to a point we've spoken about before, and is shifting the mentality from L&D, from a service provider to a strategic builder. Yep. And I think that's really what you just described there, in being hyper focused on that specific thing, as opposed to like, here's a whole library, and then no one uses it because it's just everything. As well, what is the 1 or 2 things that you could specifically focus on as well? So yeah. I think
I think that's about, and I mentioned this before. I think that's about understanding your business, being curious about your business.
yeah,
When you're talking to business leaders, when you're talking to people in your organization, you're talking about the challenges that they're facing and things that they're up to, and you're hyper curious about all of that lot, and you understand the implications for them, and you understand the implications for other teams. Like, yeah, ultimately you bring a learning lens to that if you work in learning and development, or wherever, whatever SME kind of function you might have. But I think that understanding the business, talking to people about the business, being part of that, I think that's how you become a strategic builder, because you want people to think, this is a smart guy. He knows the business. He knows what my challenges, what my issues are. I enjoy having a conversation about what's going on. And it might lead to a learning piece, or it might not. Or you become, especially if you work in learning and development in an organization, you tend to be a great connector because you know a lot of people.
Yeah.
And so you can be like, oh, have you talked to this person? Or, oh, you're facing this challenge. I was talking to this person over here about a very similar challenge. And then here's what they're doing. So you can bring those kind of pieces together. And again, I think that's where you become kind of useful and helpful. I think sometimes in learning that we over focus on the stress around, we want to be strategic. I don't just want to be strategic, just go be it. Go talk to people about that. Like go live that thing, right?
Yeah.
I think the other thing as well is like, we want a seat at the table, and it's like, you want to sit at the table because you want people to think that you're important, right? You want to sit at the table because you want to have that kind of ego boost, and I think it's being invited into the conversations where you add value to it. And I think that's what's kind of really important. So get out there, talk to people, engage with them on what they're doing, engage with them on what they're kind of working on. Just be naturally curious about what's going on. You've got learning in your back pocket. They know that. You don't need to prove that sort of stuff, especially if you're a learning leader. But just go understand your business, understand the people that you're around, be naturally curious. And I think that just helps you to be thought of more of as a partner than a service provider.
Yeah, I love that. Listen, Adam, before I let you go, where can people connect with you? If they want to reach out, say hi, work with you, where's the best place?
Absolutely. Always love to kind of connect and chat to people. As I said, best place is on LinkedIn. Just drop me a note on there. I'm probably way too hyperactive on there. I have this real thing about notifications on my phone, so I immediately have to get rid of them. So I'm hyperactive.
You're a brave man.
I'm a real inbox zero kind of guy and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah,
absolutely. Connect with me on LinkedIn. Always happy to have a chat and see what's going on in the world.
No, it was a pleasure. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show, and I wish you all the best until next week.
Thank you very much. Appreciate the invite, and let's go enjoy some of that lovely sunny weather while we still can.
We'll try.